Hi guys, in this video I will show you how to add OTP service for a registration form. So for that, first of all let's create a folder with name like my app. So let's go inside this cd my app. After that let's open it in our VS Code by using command code dot. So inside this I'm going to create two folders. So the first folder is going to be client. Inside this folder, I'm going to write all my front-end code, and then let's create another folder with name server. And inside this server folder, I'm going to write all my backend code. So let's go inside this client folder from command prompt by using cd client. So I'm going to host my front-end files using vite web development server. So to use vite, we have to use npm create vite command and then dot. So after that, it will ask us to which library we want. I'm going to select React and then JavaScript. After that, we have to install the necessary packages which are needed for our application. So just wait some time. It will install all the necessary packages. So now all the packages are successfully installed. Now if you see inside this client folder, we are getting so many folders. So to run our client folder, we have to use this npm run there command. Let me copy it and then paste it here. So after that, it will run our application in this port number. So in this port number 5173, we are going to create all our front end code. So this is the default page of it. So I have to modify it according to our needs. So I'm going to remove all the unnecessary folders. So I don't need this public folder as well as this assets folder. And let's remove the unnecessary code from here and also remove this use state. I'll remove this imports and remove the default styles of this app.css file. So I'm not going to remove this index.css file. You will understand it later. I will tell you why I'm not removing this default CSS styles inside this index.css file. So now if we see our output, it is an empty page. So let's create a registration form here. So for that, I'm going to create a folder called components, and inside this, I'm going to write all my components. So inside this, first of all, let me write a component called register.jsx, and let me export it. So now let's import this register.jsx file. Sorry, I have made a mistake in spelling. This should be register. Okay, now it's right. So now let's import this register component inside this app.jsx component. So for that, I'm going to use register. So now our root component is will render our register component. So inside this register component, we are going to create a form with fields like label for username, and then let's link this label tag for an input tag by using id is equals to this username, and inside this I'm going to write a placeholder like John Doe. So now if you see the output, we are getting whatever we are writing inside this register component. After that, let me create another label for email, and let's link this label tag to an input tag by by using id is equals to email. Let's add a placeholder like johndo@gmail.com, and let's add a field for password, and let's link this label tag for an input tag. Type should be password because we don't want to display it while typing something inside this password field. So after that, let's give the id as password. Also, let's give a name attribute for every input. Name should be username, and for this name should be email, and for this name should be password. Now let's add a button with content register. The type should be submit. So now if you see our output, it's like this. So as you can see, we're getting some styles for this input as well as for this register button. As you can see, after hovering, the border is filled with some light blue color. So these styles are coming from this index.css file, which are by default given by vite. That's why I have not removed these styles because they look good, as you can see. Now let's modify. Let's add some css styles for this form. So for that, I'm going to let me close all files and only open this register.jsx. Here I want to give a name. I want to add a class name attribute. And let's give a class name as register container. So inside this source folder, I'm going to create a styles folder. So inside this styles, I'm going to add all my CSS styles. So let's create a file with name register.css. So let's link this register.css file for this register.jsx component by using import and dot styles, then register.css. So now our register.jsx component is successfully imported this register.css. So let's add some style for this register component. So first of all, let's select this register container. I think dot register container. Let's give some width of 500 pixels, and let's give some padding of 10 pixels and add some border radius of 10 pixels. Now if you see the output, those styles are applied. Let me add a background color. So for that, I'm going to use this color. Let's add that background color with some light color. So in the previous video, I have explained about what this color extension is used for. So now as you can see, some gray background color is appeared for our register component. Now let's style the form component, form tag. So for that we have to select this form which is inside this register container form. So let's make the display flex and flex direction column so that our input fields will display on the same column, as you can see. Now let's give some gap between every input field of 10 pixels. So now it's looking good, I think. Let's add some styles for this input. So our input tag is inside this form tag. So I'm going to select by using form input. Let's add some padding for our input of 10 pixels, and let's remove the border. So now if you see, padding has applied. Now let's give some rounded borders for this input tag. So for that we have to use property called border radius 10 pixels. So now if you see our output, it's looking like this. So let's make the margin auto so that this form will be centered. Let's make the margin auto. It's not getting here. Let's make the body to be auto. So our body to add styles that we have to go inside this, and inside this I'm going to make justify content center. So now our register component is centered in our web page. Now let's give some padding for the form. Let me close this. Inside this form I'm going to add some padding of 10 pixels so that there will be a space between this and the form elements. So I think that's it. This is looking good, I think. So now let's capture the user input values after they have typing something. So for that I'm going to use a state variable. So let me increase the font size of this input. So for that, go inside here and add some font size of 18 pixels. So after user type something like Virat, and for email virat@gmail.com, right? So to capture these values we have to use a state variable. Since we are having three properties which are username, email, password, we are going to create a state variable, and the variable type should be an object. So I'm going to create a state variable with name user input, and then a function called set user input, which is used to update the user input variable. So I'm going to use useState. After clicking on it, you can see useState is imported from React. So inside this, we are going to create three properties with username. Initially, the username will be empty, as well as email field also empty, as well as password field also empty. But whenever we type something like Virat, we are going to capture these values. So whenever we type something, we have to capture this. So for that, we have to add an onChange attribute for every input field. So I'm going to add onChange, and inside this, I'm going to call a function. This I'm going to call this handle change function for every input element. Let me add here as well as for password. Now let me create this handle change function. Function handle change. So this handle change function is responsible for capturing the user input values whenever they type something in input field. So to update this user input variable, we have to call this function. Since it is an object, I'm going to add this curly braces, and inside this we are going to copy the previous values of the user input variable, and then we have to use this e dot target dot name, and the value for this will be e dot target dot value. So whenever we type something here like Virat, this value will be stored inside this username property. So that's it. So now whenever users click on this register button without filling any input field, we have to send a custom pop-up message like every input field must have a value. So to send custom pop-up message, we have to install a package called React Hothost, which is used to send custom pop-up messages. So for that, let me stop our application and then install a package called React Hothost. So after writing this command npm react hothost, it will install the React Hothost. So to check, we can simply go inside this client folder, and inside this package.json file, You can see in the dependencies property we have React Hot Toast. That means our application have React Hot Toast. So now we can use it. So in order to use it, we have to first import that inside our root folder app.jsx, and inside this we have to write this toaster. It is not importing automatically, so I have to import it manually by using import toaster from React Hot Toast. This should be inside inverted commas. So now I have successfully imported toaster. So this toaster is a container for the toast message. So here we want to use toast. So we have to import toast from React Hot Toast. So now whenever user clicks on this register, we have to call a function. We have to call an event like on submit. So whenever user clicks on this register button, we have to add an event called on submit. On submitting this form, we are going to call a function called handle submit. So let's create this handle submit function. Handle submit. So inside this, we are going to check whether this username or email or password is filled or not. So for that, we have to use user input dot username equal to empty, or user input dot email equal to empty string, or user input dot password equal to empty. So if any one of this happens, we are going to send a error message like, so inside this toast library we have a function called toast.error, and inside this error we can send the message we want. So I'm going to send a message like every input field must have a value. So now if you ever clicks on this submit button, this site can be reached. Okay, I forgot to run our application. So I have to use npm run the command. Now let's run the server again. So now if I type something like rat, so I'm not filling this email and password fields. So if I click on this register button, it should send a toast message, but it is not sending it. I think we have made a mistake somewhere. Submit, handle submit. After registering. Okay, you can see the pop-up message is displaying, but it is instantly being hidden. So, so for that we have to prevent the reloading after clicking on this register button. So for that we have to make some changes here. So let's add an parameter like event or whatever you want. So I have to prevent the reloading behavior of the browser. Now let's check it. Now you can see after clicking on this register button, we are getting that every input field must have value. So if I fill this username field and as well as this email field, but not filling this password field. So if I click on this register, you can see every input field must have a value message is appearing because we are not filling this password field. So that is the use of this React Hot Toast library. Okay guys, now let's create another component called verification inside this components folder with name verification.jsx. let's export it, and let's let's create a h2 tag with content OTP verification, and then let's create a form tag, and inside this I'm going to create an input tag with type text and placeholder like enter OTP, and add a button to submit the OTP with type submit. Content should be verified. So now let's load this module inside this app.jsx. Let me comment it out. Let me comment this register component for now, and let's import verification component. Let's check the output. So now our verification component will look like this. Let's add some styles for this. So for that I'm going to add a CSS file with name verification.css. Let me close all the files and open this verification.jsx as well as verification.css. So now let's import this verification.css file inside this verification component using import slash styles verification.css. Let's add a class name for this div tag with class name verification container. Let's select this dot verification container. Let's add the background color of. Let's add the same background color which is applied for this register container. Copy that and paste it inside this verification.css file. Let's give some width of 500 pixels. Let's give some 400 pixels. So now if you see the output, it will look like this. Let's give some padding as well as add some border radius of 10 pixels. So now let's make this text OTP verification to be centered. So let's select this h2 tag which is inside this verification container, dot verification container, and then h2. Let's make text align to be centered so that our text will be centered. Now let's add some styles to the form, selecting form and then display flex. Let's make the flex direction to be column, and let's add some gap of 10 pixels. Okay, now I think it's looking good. Let's give some padding for this form as well. Padding of 10 pixels. Okay, now I think it's looking good. So now let's create another component called homepage. Let's create it inside this component folder, homepage.jsx. Let's export it. Inside this, I'm going to add a content inside this h1 tag like welcome to homepage, and let's add a logout button. Logout. Let's render this homepage component inside this app.jsx component. So let me comment this, and let's load that homepage component. Okay, it's looking like this. So okay, let me remove this. Let's add this register component. Okay, so after submitting, after user clicks on this and clicks on this, after user fill all the details in this input fields and clicks on register button, we have to pass we have to call an API endpoint, which will be going to create in backend, and that API is responsible for checking the entered email is already exist in our database or not. So if the entered email is already existed in our database, we are going to send a pop-up message like user already exist. So if the entered email is not registered in our database, we have to we have to render our verification component. So if the entered email is not registered, we have to render this verification component to the user. So for that, let me remove this for now and remove this. Let's comment. Let's remove the comment. So now our output is looking like this. Okay, now let's add some backend logic. So for that, I'm going to command prompt and click on this new tab. Let's go inside our application, its name my app, and let's go inside this server folder by using command cd change directory and then server. So I'm going to use node to write my backend logic. So you have to write npm init s. After that, it will add a package.json file. So if you see, you can see a package.json file is added. So inside this, I'm going to create a file name with name server.js. So in this file, we are going to build a web server using Express. So to use Express, we have to install it first. So to install it, since we are already in our server folder, let's use npm i and then Express. So after that, it will install the Express library. So to check, you can simply go to package.json. Inside the dependencies, you can say Express is installed. So now let's load that. First of all, let me close all the files and open this server.js file. So let's import the Express file from Express module by using import Express from Express. Okay, now let's give a port number for our backend. So I'm going to give 4000. So after that, let's create a variable called app and let's reference this express. So this app variable is now referencing our express module so that now we can use all the functions inside this express by using this app variable. So let's give in express we have a function called listen, and inside this function we are going to give the first parameter as the port number, and the second parameter will be our callback function. Inside this we can give a message called server started. So to run this file, we have to go inside this command prompt and use node and then our root file which is server.js. So after running it, you can see it is throwing an error like import express from express. Okay, when we use so to load modules, you can use either import or require. So for this video, I'm going to use this import instead of require. So if we are using import, we have to make some changes for this package.json file. Just go inside this and add this property called type and give value as module. Let's give a comma here. So now if you run our file, I think we will not get an error. As you can see, we are getting this message server started, which means our server has successfully started on this port number 4000. So To know that, let's give a message like, so inside this express we have also called a function like get. So the first parameter in get method will be a root, and then second parameter will be a callback function with parameters req comma res. So req means request, res means response. So let's give a message like in response we have another function called send, which is used to send some messages like hi from backend. So now let's run our backend in Chrome by using localhost. Let's give port number 4001. So now 4000. So if I run it, we are getting message like cannot get. It's happening. Let me change this to 4010. And let's run the server again. Let me clear this. Server started at this port number 4010. Now let's open it in Chrome by using localhost and 4010. As you can see, we are getting the message hi from backend, which means our server is successfully running on our browser to listen all the requests from frontend. So now inside this, we are going to create a post route. So in Express, we also called a function called post, which is used to listen all the post requests which are coming from frontend. So inside this post, I'm going to create a route like registration check. So you can give anything you want here. I just want to give registration check, and the second parameter will be request comma response, and inside this, so after user fill their details from these input fields and clicks on this register button, we are going to call this API endpoint. So inside this, first of all, let's write a code like response.status. I'm going to write a status code like 200, which means okay, and then JSON. Let's give a message like hi from backend. Let's go inside this register.jsx. So on submitting, let's make this method as post because we are using post inside this server. So on submitting this, we are going to let's create a variable like call API, which is responsible for calling our API endpoint, and then fetch. Inside this, we have to specify the root, which means HTTP 127.0.0.1, which means local host address. After that, our backend is running on this port number called 4010, right? So we have to use 4010 here, and then we are calling this endpoint, right? So I have to write this root registration check, registration check, and then we have to specify the request headers like method will be a post, and second property will be headers, and inside this header we're going to give a property called content type, type of the content, which will be application / JSON, and after that we have to specify the body, which will be JSON dot stringify, and then we have to give our state variable, which is your input, because all our all our details entered by username, email, password are inside this user input variable, right? So I have to stringify that. Since this JSON dot stringify means to make the object into a JSON object. So for that purpose, we have to use this JSON dot stringify function. So in the backend, our user input variable will be a JSON, not an object, because we are converting that object into a JSON by using JSON dot stringify function. So after that, let's give another variable like response, and this is used to write this call API.json. So this call API will return an object, and we are converting that into a JSON. And after that, let's console the variable response. So after we are calling this backend endpoint, it will take some time to return a response. Since it will take some time to return a response, we have to await it. So if you are using await, we have to make the function to be an asynchronous. So after writing asynchronous, we are not getting an error for this await. Since so here also this should be await because it will return a promise. So now let's enter something. Let me open the browser console. So let me refresh it. Let's enter like Virat, then Virat at the rate gmail.com, and let's give a password 1234 and fix on register. So after that, it is returning an error like failed to fetch. Let me check is there anything wrong in backend. There is nothing wrong. Why I'm getting this? Let me see the issues. Cars response. Okay, our status is getting blocked. Okay, to make our server listen to the front end request, we have to use a package called CORS. So CORS stand for cross origin resource sharing. So to use CORS inside our backend, first of all let me install that package by using npm CORS. After that it will install. Let me check whether it is installed or not. Here inside this error folder, inside this package.json you can see CORS. So now let's import that CORS inside our root file server.js. Import CORS from CORS. Let's use the CORS by using app.use CORS, and inside this we are going to give two properties. The first property will be origin. So inside this origin we have to specify our front end port. Since our front end is running on this port, we have to give this inside this origin property value. So let me give it http localhost and then address 5173 to forward slash, and then second property will be credentials to be true. Now let's run our server again by using node. So whenever we make some changes in our backend, we have to run our file again and again. So to get rid of that problem, we can install a package called mongoose. Not mongoose. It is, I forgot it. Yes, it's nodemon. So by using this nodemon, we can automatically restart our server whenever we make some changes in our backend code. Let me see our nodemon is installed or not. You can see our nodemon is successfully installed. Now instead of node, we can use nodemon and then our root file which is server.js. Now after running this, our nodemon will automatically restarts our server whenever we make some changes in our backend files. So now let me refresh it and type something like virat, virat@gmail.com, enter some password. So after clicking on register button, you can see you are getting a response from hi from backend. So this message is getting from here because after submitting this form, we are calling this handle submit function. Inside this handle submit function, we are calling our backend root with API endpoint. This endpoint. So inside this endpoint, we are returning a response with status code 200, which means okay, with a message called hi from backend. That's why you are seeing a message like this. So now our front end is successfully able to send a request to our backend, and our server is also able to receive request from front end. So all this because of using this course. So if you don't use this course, we are not able to receive request from the front end. That's the use of this course, which stands for cross origin resource sharing. So now what we have to do register.jsx. So let's connect a database for our backend. So for that, let me close this client folder, and inside this server folder, I'm going to create a folder called database, and inside this database, I'm going to create a function called connect to mongodb dot js. So inside this, so to connect to the mongodb database, we need a package called mongoose. So let's install it by using npm mongoose. So after that, it will install the mongoose package. Now let's run our server again. So now let's import that mongoose by using import mongoose from mongoose, and then let's create a function called connect to mongodb, and inside this, so in mongoose we have a function called mongoose.connect, and inside this we have to give our connection string. So I'm going to use mongodb compass. Just click on mongodb compass. So if you don't have one, simply install it from browser, and then you will get the interface like this. So from this, just click on this and then copy connection string. After that, let's copy this and paste it here, and after that I'm going to, so this will be a connection string. After that, just give a forward slash and give a database name. So I'm going to name my database as my app users. Since it returns a promise, we have to await it. Since we are using await, we have to make this function as an asynchronous by using async keyword. So to know our MongoDB is successfully connected or not, you can simply use then method, and then inside this I'm going to console a message like MongoDB connection successful. So if it is fail, we're going to call a callback function, and inside this we are going to call that error. So now let's export this function by using export default connect to MongoDB. Now let's import this connect to mongodb.js file inside this server.js using import connect to mongodb from database folder. Now after server learning on this, let's call this connect to mongodb function here. Since it is a function, we have to give parentheses out of that. So now if you see our command prompt, if you can able to, let me scroll down, we are getting some errors. Did you mean to import after MongoDB? What's wrong? Let me restart the server again using nodemon server.js. It's throwing some error. Did you mean to import database connect? Okay, we are only telling this. We have to add extension.js. So now if you see our command prompt, you can see the message like MongoDB connection successful, which means our backend is successfully connected to our MongoDB database. So after that, let's create a folder called models. Not here, we have to create models folder inside this server. Models, and inside this models, I'm going to create a file with name user model.js. So inside this, since we are going to use mongoose, we have to import mongoose from mongoose library. So I'm going to create a variable like user model, and inside this I'm going to create, since we are going to use an object, we have to use this new keyword, and then mongoose.schema. So schema means structure of our database. So inside the database, we are going to store the username, email as well as password, right? So we are going to give username, which will be a type of string, and then email, which will also a string, and then password, which is also a string. So now we have to create a class. So for classes, we have to give the first character as a capital. So I'm going to use a capital letter user class, and inside this, I'm going to call. I'm going to create a collection with name users, and then we're going to call our user model variable, which is the structure of our database. So if you are familiar with MongoDB, you can know what is called collection. If you don't know, just search in Google and come back to the video. So after that, we have to export this user class so that we can use that in our root file server.js file. Let's export this, and let's import this in our root file server.js. Import, what is that? User class. Import user class from this models folder and this model for user model.js. So now we can also able to get our model inside our root file server.js file. So just remove this. So Our front end can able to pass the values to the backend, like this username where at the rate. And after clicking on this register, our front end can able to send this values from front end to back end. But to receive those in our back end, we have to use two middleware functions, which are app.use express.json and then app.use express.url encoded with object property extended will be true. So these all are middlewares. Let me comment it. I think middlewares. So these two middlewares are used to parse the values entered by user here to our backend, and those values are available under an object called request.body. So let me console those inside this. So now let me, I have already typed here, so just click on register. So after clicking on this register, if you see the backend, our objects are empty. Uh, we are not getting any error in backend, guys. So I think there will be a problem. There is a problem in front end. Okay, guys, I made a mistake by avoiding S letter here. It should be headers, not header. So now, if I click on this register button and open this command prompt, now you can see we are getting all those values we have entered in front end to the back end. So all this happens because of using these two middlewares. So if I comment these two middlewares, and now if I click on this register button, if you see the command prompt, you can see we are getting an undefined message. Let me remove the comments for these two lines. Now if I click on register, you can see we are getting those are details. So that is the use of these two middlewares. Now, since inside this request.body object, we have three properties: our name, email, password. So I think you guys know about object destructuring. I'm just using object destructuring here so that access, we can extract the properties which are inside this object. So we are giving this username variable will store this username value, and the and this email will store this email, and password will be store the password. So now inside this I'm going to create try catch block, and in the catch block we'll catch the errors and display it on our console, as well as give a message to users by using status code 500, which means internal server error. Let's give a message like, let's give an error, internal server error. So now let's write the code inside this try block. So inside this I'm going to create a variable called check email. This check email variable is responsible for check the email entered by user is already existing in our database or not. So for that we're going to use, since all our data is inside this user class, like our model and our schema are inside this user class variable, right? So we have to use inside this inside that user class. So we have already imported that user class here, so you can use it inside the server.js file. So let's use a method called find one. Inside this, we are going to, since we are going to check whether the email is already existed in our database or not, we are going to give that email inside this find one function. So if the check email is true, we are going to return a response with status code 409, which means conflict, and then send a message like email already exists. So if the entered email is not existed in our database, we have to render the OTP verification page, as well as we have to send an OTP to the email which is entered by user. So to generate a OTP, we have to write some backend logic, and for navigating the user to OTP verification page, we have to write some front end code. So first of all, let's create a backend code. So the backend is to generate an OTP to the entered email. So for that, I'm going to use here a variable called OTP, and this variable is responsible for generating a 4-digit OTP. So for that, I'm going to use method.floor. So if you are familiar with JavaScript, I think you guys know about floor function, which returns. So if the number is 1.5, this, like if the math.floor is 1.5, this OTP value will be 1. That is the use of the floor function. So inside this, I'm going to create a number like 1000, plus I'm going to use another function which is called math.random. So this math.random function will return a number from 0 to 1. So I'm going to use that, and then into 9000. So now this OTP variable will generate a 4-digit OTP. So if you want to add 6-digit OTP, we have to add another two zeros here as well as here. Then it will generate a 6-digit OTP. I only want to generate 4-digit OTP, so I'm going to remove these two zeros. So now, if the email is not exist, we are going to send this OTP. So after that, we have to create a variable like new user, and inside this, I'm going to create an instance from this user class variable, new user class. Since we are having username, email, password, we have to write those inside this username. So the value of this username will be this username which is entered by user, and then email will be this email which is entered by user, and then password will be this password value entered by user. So we also need to send OTP. So this OTP, the value generated by this OTP variable should also stored in database, so that we can check whether the OTP stored in our database is matches with the OTP entered by user. Since we are using OTP here, we also have to type here OTP. So the type of this OTP property will be a number, because we are generating the OTP as integers, right? That's why I have to make this type as a number. So now after that, so we have to send OTP to the user email, right? So for sending a message to user's email, we have to use a package called nodemailer. So let's install it for our server file. Let me stop this, and I'm going to install the nodemailer package by using npmi nodemailer. After that, it will install the package. As you can see, it is successfully installed. Now let me run our backend again. So now if you see our package.json in our server, you can see nodemailer is successfully installed. Now let's import this inside our root file server.js. Let's import this here. Import nodemailer from nodemailer. So now let's create a variable called transporter, and inside this we are going to use a function which is inside this nodemailer called create transport. So inside this, first of all, we have to mention our service provider. So I'm going to use Google Mail. So we have to give service as Gmail, and then the second property will be auth. So inside this auth, we have to add a first property called user, and then second property will be a pass, which means password. So in the user property, we have to add our email. I'm going to type my email, which is patientspoder@gmail.com. And inside this pass property, we have to give our app password for our email. So to generate a app password for our mail, you can simply go to Chrome and search for Google app password, and then search. So after that, simply scroll down until you found this. So after that, click on here. So since I want to generate an app password for this email patientspodder@gmail.com, I have to use that. And after that, we have to give our password. I'm going to type my password. So after that, simply click on next. So after that, we have to create an app name. Since I have named my app as my app, I'm going to name it as my app. So after that, if I click on this create button, Google will give us a 16-digit character password. So we have to simply copy that and paste it here. So because of some privacy issues, I don't want you to show my password. So if I show you that password, you can simply able to log in to my account. So let me pause the video. I will be back. So now I have successfully given my password inside this pass property, guys. So I have created a variable called pass inside this .env file. So this .env file means we have to store all sensitive information inside this .env file. So inside this .env file, I have created a variable called pass, and inside that pass variable, I have given my password, app password, which is given by Google. So in order to accept that pass variable, which is inside this .env file, we have to use a package called .env. Let me stop this and install the package called .env. So by using this .env, you can access the variables which are inside this .env variable without specifying the values of the environment variables. So now let me run our server again. Let's see our package.json file have .env. So you can see .env package is successfully installed. Let's import that in our root file by using import .env from .env. So after that we have to give a function called config, which is inside this .env package, and give parenthesis. So now we can able to get the value of this pass variable, which is inside this dot environment file. So now after that, to check whether the node mailer connection is successful or not, you can simply use this transporter variable, and inside this we are going to use this verify function, and inside this you can simply give two parameters like error comma success. So if there is any error, we are going to console that error, else, sorry guys, this should be hit like this. So if there is not any error, we are going to console a message like node mailer connection successful. Let's see our command prompt. As you can see, we are getting this node mailer connection successful message. That means we have successfully connected our mail to this application. So now after that, here we have to create a variable like mail options. So I'm going to name it as mail option. You can give anything you want, and this mail option type will be an object. And inside this, we have to use a property called from. And inside this, I'm going to type my email. So from this email, we are going to receive OTPs whenever user types their email here. So and from two, we are going to give the email entered by user, which is inside this email variable. So after that, we have to mention the subject. So I'm going to give a subject like OTP for registration, and then you can specify message inside this HTML property. Since we are going to use strings as well as variables, I'm going to use template literals, and inside this I'm going to create a div, and inside this div I'm going to give a message like hi. So this hi will be a string, and we are going to say hi to the user. Since our username will be stored inside this username variable, we have to give that username, and then let's create another paragraph tag, and inside this paragraph tag I'm going to write a message like our OTP for creating an account is this OTP variable. So to use variables inside this template literals, we have to write the syntax like this dollar sign and then curly braces, and inside the curly braces we have to mention the variables. So now after that, let's give some styles to this. So I'm going to give some styles like background color will be some black, hash 242424, and then color will be white, and padding will be some 20 pixels, then border radius will be some 10 pixels, and then make the text content to be centered by using text align, center. So that's it. So now this mail option variable will contain all the mail address like from to subject and then HTML. So in NodeMailer, we have another function called send mail. Sorry guys, we have to use this transporter because we are creating the transport and assign those values to this transporter variable. So you have to use this transporter, and inside this transporter we are going to use this send mail function, and inside this, first of all, we have to give our address. So all our address is inside this mail option variable, so I have to give that as a first parameter, and the second parameter will be a callback like error or success. So if there is any error, we are going, so if any error, we are going to console that error, else we are going to return a response to the user like status code with 200, which means okay, and then message like OTP sent. So after doing all this, we are going to save the user details inside our MongoDB database. Since this will return a promise, so that we have to edit it. So now we have successfully generated an OTP to the we have successfully generated an OTP to the user whenever they type all these fields and clicks on this register. We are going to send an OTP to the user's email. But we have to, after clicking on this register, we have to redirect the user to this component called OTP verification. Right? We have to show this component to the user after user clicks on this register. So for that, to specify, we have to specify a different path for every component. Like if the path is verification, we have to render the we have to render this verification component. So if the path is a home page like this, we have to render this home page component. So for that, we have to use a library called React Router DOM. So let me install that. So that React Rotterdam should be installed in this client folder. So let me stop this and then install React Rotterdam. So after that it will install this package. Let's wait. So now it is successfully installed. Let's run our front-end application again, and let's see our React Rotterdam is installed or not inside this package.json file. As you can see, it is successfully installed. Let me close all this, and let's wrap our application inside this browser router. So now our application can able to specify a different path because we have wrapped our application inside this browser router. So after that, let's go to inside this field, and inside this I'm going to use roots. We have to import this from React Rotterdam inside this file. So I'm going to use. import browser router from React router down, because this browser router is available under this React router DOM library. We have to import that, and inside this we are going to use roots and root, so I have to import those as well by using import roots comma root from React router down. We are using roots because we have more than one root, right? So for verification we have to render verification component, and for homepage root we have to render this homepage. So because of that we have to use roots, and inside these roots we have three roots. So the first root will be this, and inside this we have to specify the path. So initially the path will be this. So if it is this path, we have a prop called element, and inside this element we have to specify our register component. So let me render that, and then second path will be verification. So if the path is slash verification, we are going to render our verification component. So I have to use this, and then create another route for home page. So if the path is slash homepage, we are going to render our homepage component. So now I think, so after, let's wait. Oh, we are getting two. Okay, we have to remove this. We are rendering register component two times. That's why we are getting two forms. Let me copy this, paste it here. So now if you see the output, so I think some errors. Let me refresh it. Let's see the error occurred in roots component. Tab, browser router, browser router, roots comma root. What is the error? So all component children of roots must be a root. Okay guys, inside this root, you shouldn't, we should remove this toaster from here and paste it outside the roots. So now let's check. Yeah, it's working. So after user submits this form, we have to redirect the user to this verification route. So on clicking this register, so that means we have to go inside this register.jsx. Here we have on submit, and inside this handle submit. So inside this we are going to check. So after submitting the form, we'll go inside this handle submit function, and inside this, so our response from backend will store inside this response variable. So we are going to check if there is any error we are receiving from the backend. So if there is any error response from the server, we are going to return that response by using this toast.error, and the message will be this response.error. So if there is any error, we are going to instantly return the error with this toast message. So if there is no error from backend, we are going to, so we have to use we have to use a hook called use navigate. So Let's create a variable called navigate, and inside that we're going to use navigate. So let's import this use navigate from React rotor down. Use navigate from React rotor down. So our use navigate hook is referenced by this navigate. So now we have to use that navigate, and inside this navigate we have to specify the path. So if there is no error from our backend, we are going to redirect the user to this verification page. So we have to specify this path verification. So now let's check whether it's working or not. Let me enter the details again using this and my email, which is month@gmail.com, and type the password and fix on register. Now let's see the OTP. So now you can see we are getting our HTML code with these styles because we have added background color with some black, and then we are making the text color as white. All those styles are applied. Now let's enter the OTP here. 1234. As you can see, we are not getting this home page after typing the OTP and then clicking on this verify, because we have not created an endpoint for this to check whether the OTP is matched with the OTP which is received for the email. So for that we have to we have to create another API endpoint for checking the entered OTP is correct or not. So let's go inside our. Let me close all these files. Let's open our server.js file, and then here I'm going to create another endpoint with post method for managing our verification component. So I'm going to name the root as verification check, and then request comma response. And since this is an arrow function, we have to give this, and then inside this we are going to create try catch block. So in the catch block we will catch the error message, and then return a message to the client with status code 500, which means internal server error. And let's give a message as internal server error. Let's call this verification check endpoint in our front end. So inside this verification.js, so on submitting this verify button, we are going to call that API endpoint. So for that, we have to add an on submit for this form tag. On submitting this form, we are going to call a function called handle verification. So let's create this handle verification function, and then on submitting the form, we have to capture the value entered by user in the OTP field. So here I'm going to give the add name attribute with value OTP, and then I'm going to create a state variable for capturing the user input. So I'm going to name it as user OTP. So this user OTP is a state variable, and then to update that user OTP variable, we have to create a function. So I'm going to create that as a set user OTP, and then give use state. Initially it will be empty, but whenever user types something, we are going to call this on change attribute, and then inside here after user types something, an event will be occurred, and we are going to capture that event and call the set user OTP function. Then inside we are going to target the value whatever user types. So now After submitting the form, we are calling this, and then inside this, we are going to create a variable called call API, which is responsible for calling our this API endpoint. So inside this, the first parameter will be our backend endpoint, which will be 127.0.0.1, and then port is 4010, and then this root called verification check. Let me copy this and paste it here. So, and the second parameter will be request headers. So let me copy those from this register.jsx file, method post, and here, then paste it here. Let me remove this, and then in the body we have to pass this user OTP variable. So here we have to give an object like this and add a property called OTP and give this value. So now our front end can able to send a request to the back to this endpoint with body contains this user OTP entered by user. So now let's create another variable called response, which is responsible for storing the response which is given by server, and then if if there is any error from the server, we are going to return that error by using toast dot error, and then that error will be response dot error. Since we are using toast, we have to import it. Let me import the toast from React hot toast. So if there is any error, we are going to send that error message as a which means a pop-up message. So if not, we are going to navigate the user to this home page. So this home page will be rendered if the root is this slash home page. So to redirect the user from this verification component, we have to use user navigate and store that in a variable called navigate, and inside this navigate I'm going to call user navigate hook, and let's import user navigate from React outer DOM. Now that's if there is no error from backend, we are going to navigate the user to this homepage route. Home page. This should be inside inverted commas. So now, so if user did not enter any OTP and clicks on submit, we have to send a pop-up message like please enter the OTP. So for that, I'm going to add this user OTP, which will be entered by user. So whatever user enters in the input field, which will be stored inside this user OTP variable. So if user does not enter any OTP, which means the user OTP is an empty string, we are going to return a toast message like please enter the OTP. So now let's add a backend logic. So inside this try block, first we have to capture the user OTP which is entered by user. So the user OTP will be available under request.body, right? So we have to create a variable called OTP, and inside this OTP we are going to access the OTP by using this request.body.otp. So the value of this user OTP is a empty string. So since OTP is an integer, we have to convert this user OTP to an integer. So for that, we have to use a function called parseInt. So this parseInt function is used to convert the string into a integer. So we are converting the string into an integer by using this parseInt function. So after that, let's name this variable as your OTP, guys, because I already have given OTP inside this registration check route. So let's give this your OTP. So after that, we are going to check. We are going to create a variable called check OTP. So this check OTP variable is responsible for checking the database OTP. So since our OTP is inside this user class, we have to use that inside here. User class dot find one OTP which matches this user OTP. Since it returns a promise, we have to await it. So if we are using await, we have to make this function as asynchronous. So if the check OTP and check OTP dot OTP is not equal to undefined, and this check OTP dot OTP is equal to this user OTP which is entered by user. So if this is true, we are going to send a message to the user with status code 200.json with message OTP verified. Else we are going to send a message like we are going to return a message with status code 200 with message status code 400, which means bad request, and give a error message like incorrect OTP. So now let's check whether it's working or not. Let's open this and let's enter the name and then email. I'm going to write my email and then password. So after clicking on this register, it will redirect us to verification page. So now let's check whether we have received the OTP or not. So we have successfully received an OTP which is 9981. I'm going to write 998282. So if we enter wrong OTP, it's not redirecting me to anything. Response.error, error. Not, it's an error. method. Let me write a correct OTP 9981. Let's see whether it's redirecting us to. So it is not redirecting us. Let's see if there is any errors. I'm not getting any errors. But why it's not redirecting us? Verification check. OTP. Let's give let's give this outside the try block. Check OTP. Hold on the phone. Right. Let's enter the OTP again. 1981. It is not redirecting to the home page. I think we have made a mistake. We will enter the OTP. Okay. Let me prevent the default behavior of the browser. Reading without prevent default. Now let's check. So if I click on verify without entering any OTP, it is sending a pop-up message like please enter the OTP. Let's enter this 9981. All API.json is not a function. Okay guys, we are not awaiting the after calling the API it will return a promise, right? So if it return a promise we have to use this await function and then sync. So we also have to await this as well. So now let's check it again. Let's enter a wrong OTP called 9980. So if I enter 9980, it is saying that incorrect OTP. Now let's enter the correct OTP 9981. So if I click on verify, it is redirecting me to this welcome page. So now let's open our MongoDB Compass. So if you open that, you can see our database name here, which is my app users. And inside this, we have a collection called users. And inside this, you can see all the fields, username, email, password, OTP are coming because we have created our structure with those fields username, email, password, OTP. That's why they are coming here username, email, password, OTP. So if I enter like rot and then let me enter another email of mine and then password. So after clicking on this register button, it will redirect us to the OTP verification page. But if I refresh my MongoDB Compass, you can see those details are stored in our MongoDB Compass. So now let's add a functionality to this logout button. So after clicking on it, we have to redirect the user to the register page. So for that, we have to add an on click for this logout button. So this logout button is inside this home page. So on clicking this, we are going to call a function called logout. Let's create that function logout, and then inside this, so we have to navigate the user. So since we need navigate, we have to import it using use navigate from React router down. Let's assign that to output call navigate and then use navigate. Let's navigate the user to the empty root. You can see if the root is this forward slash, we are rendering the register component. So now let me refresh it, and if I click on this forward button, it is redirecting us to this register component. So that's it for this video, guys. Thank you for watching.